The Torah tells us this week how Joseph reveals himself to his brothers. And prior to him revealing himself, the Torah tells us, and I'll quote to you, this is the beginning of chapter 45, "V'lo yachol Yosef lehitapek lechol hanitzavim alav." He wasn't able to contain his emotions anymore. He saw his brothers, he saw his younger brother, he saw the way the older brothers were protecting his younger brother Binyamin. And we ask ourselves, why did Joseph pull this whole stunt on them? Why couldn't he just reveal himself the first time around, invite them down, bring them in? After all, they're his brothers. Joseph had a plan. Joseph wanted his brothers to do a complete teshuvah, complete repentance, in order that they get atonement for that horrible act that they did 22 years ago of kidnapping him and selling him. The only way, and this question could be asked again, why did Joseph plant his goblet in the innocent brother's sack of food? Maybe put it in Reuven, the oldest. Maybe put it in Yehudah, the leader. Put it in one of theirs. But no, he puts it in the innocent younger brother, the one who had no part in the sale at all. That's a good question. Ever thought of that? So listen to this. It was actually only at that time when the brothers saw that Benjamin had the goblet that they knew that everything that was happening to them was not ordained by God. Meaning they really thought that they deserved to be slaves, to be maybe even killed, punished. But they didn't believe. They were convinced that Benjamin did not deserve any of that because he was not part of their sin. And that was the only sin they ever did. As soon as his brothers saw that Benjamin was the one that was being framed, they picked up on this skit and they said, this cannot be. That's the beginning of this week's Torah portion, Vayigash Yehudah. Judah gets up and he says, I got a problem with you, Mr. Viceroy. You're not playing a fair game. If it would have been in my bag, I could accept. Any other of my brother's bags, I could accept. But not in this boy's bag. You're framing him. You got a problem now. And Joseph, according to many commentaries, kind of backed down because he got scared from his older brother. Remember, once an older brother, always an older brother. But Joseph conceded. And that's when he couldn't hold himself up. And he quickly asked everybody to leave the room except his brothers, not to embarrass them. When he reveals himself, he didn't know what they were going to do. Would they fall down? Would they cry? Would they faint? Or were they spellbound, like the Torah says they were? But he didn't want his brothers to have anyone else witness that very emotional and very truth-telling moment and experience. And then we go back to our question of Benjamin. Why did he do all this? If we think of it, the only way Joseph could ever know if his brothers did a complete repentance was based on the way they treat the baby brother Benjamin. Because who was the baby brother when he was growing up? He was. Yeah, Benjamin was alive, but Benjamin wasn't his father's favorite. As soon as Joseph was kidnapped and sold, who became Jacob's new favorite? Benjamin. You want to know something? Jacob also favored Benjamin at that point. He actually displayed and he showed favoritism towards Benjamin. And the brothers had no ounce of jealousy. But Joseph didn't know that. Joseph invites all the brothers. Joseph invites his baby brother, Benjamin. He wants to see how they act. He framed him. He set him up. The brothers are willing to go as slaves and even give up their lives for Benjamin. Now Joseph knows they made a complete tshuva. They made a complete repentance. That's why he went through this. And furthermore, as we're going to soon see in a moment, Joseph knew that the Jewish people are going to be exiled to Egypt. And he knew that he was a sacrifice to come and be the first for one reason and one reason only: to create a soft landing for them when they come. Think of it. When you go to another country, when you move somewhere, isn't it nice to move somewhere where you know somebody? It's very nice. What if you know the mayor? What if you know the prime minister, the viceroy, the king? Hey, now we're talking. And he set everything up for us. And he's got jobs in line for us. And he has land for us. He's got food for us, especially in a year of famine. That would be great. That's what Joseph wanted to do. But he couldn't just give a soft landing. He wanted to clean the diamond a little. Let those brothers do some repentance, get some atonement, so they can come and really enjoy the soft landing in their exile. Right? The example I gave was moving somewhere. What if you're being kicked out of one place, having to flee to another place? That's not too fun. So Joseph set up that soft landing, that welcome for his father and his brothers and the rest of their family for the next 210 years. It was a long time. I read from the verse 4, chapter 45, verse 4. It says, Vayomer es Yosef elechav. Joseph tells his brothers, after revealing himself, he says once, I'm Joseph, is our father still alive? They're stunned. He says, by the way, I'm Joseph, the one, your little brother who you sold. They still were in shock. Then, Vayomer Yosef elechav, Joseph tells his brothers, Geshuna elai, come forth, because they were taking steps back. They didn't know, was Joseph going to kill them? The brothers didn't know what Joseph was going to do. He says, come forth. Vayomer Ani Yosef achichem asher mechartem oti Mitzrayma. He says, I am your brother who you sold to Egypt. This is me. I know you could never imagine this, but this is me. Rashi gives a very interesting commentary. And again, we'll keep this as mature as possible, but Joseph actually, according to Rashi, showed his Brit Milah to his brothers to show them, I am Joseph, I'm really circumcised. Now, again, it's not something too common. We don't expect anyone to do that nowadays, we hope. But again, back then, it was different. If we recall a couple parashas ago, we had Abraham have his servant, Eliezer, even grab his Brit and swear upon holding it. Again, something that's not done nowadays. But it was not a sign of embarrassment or shame. It was actually a sign of honor. I have the stamp of God on me, and I'm fulfilling the will of God, and I am your brother. That's how Rashi interprets it. The question that Zera Shimshon has on that is, and he's not the only one, the Chizkuni, amongst other commentaries say, how did Joseph, showing that he is circumcised to his brothers, prove any more that he is who he is? If I take you back to last week's Torah portion, which I will, we're in chapter 41, verse 55, it says as follows, Vatirav kol eretz Mitzrayim, and all of Egypt, after the 7 years of plenty, went into a dire famine. Vayitzak ha'am el paro lalachem, and the whole nation, the whole Egyptian nation, come streaming towards Paro for food. Vayomer paro lechol Mitzrayim lechul Yosef asher yomar lachem ta'asu. He said, go to Joseph, whatever Joseph says, do. You know how Rashi comments over there? He says, you know what, Vatirav kol haaretz, that the whole land was in famine? That any of the Egyptians who saved food for themselves, who didn't bring them to Joseph's massive silos, all went sour, all went bad and rotten. The only food that was left in the whole region was what Joseph kept, what he stored on behalf of everybody. And they come to Paro and say, we have no food. He says, well, you guys have made a mistake. Why didn't you keep some food? We kept food. It went all bad. Whoa. So do whatever Joseph says. But that crazy noodle wants us to circumcise ourselves. Paro says, I have nothing to tell you. Do what he says. You want to eat, get circumcised. You don't want to eat, don't circumcise yourself. You're going to die of starvation. So Joseph circumcised all of Egypt. Every male Egyptian who wanted to survive and eat was circumcised. So coming back to Rashi this week, the Zera Shimshon says, what type of proof was it that Joseph showed that he was circumcised? All Egyptian men were circumcised. Before answering that question, I think a valid point we should all address, the Zera Shimshon addresses it as well, is why was Joseph so set on having the Egyptians circumcise themselves before feeding them? That's a good question. For what reason? So this goes based on what we said. Joseph knew that his family is going to come down. Joseph knew that his family is going to unfortunately assimilate or have the risks of assimilation. Based on that, the Zera Shimshon explains that Joseph had a really good intention on circumcising every male. Do you know that there are 3 issues with Joseph circumcising the Egyptians? Number 1, the Shulchan Aruch tells us in the laws of Brit Milah that a Jew is not supposed to give or do a circumcision for a Gentile unless it is for or with the intention of converting. That's number 1. Number 2, the Talmud tells us that a Jew is not supposed to heal a Gentile for free. Meaning, it should either be for pay, for wage, or if there would be a life-threatening situation, meaning if all Jewish doctors wouldn't take Gentiles, then that would create a threat, so then they would be able to. But it's still not so simple to do so for free. Joseph didn't get paid for circumcising. He did it in order to give people food, on the contrary. And third, listen to something else that Zera Shimshon brings. The Midrash tells us that Abraham, our forefather, stands by the gates of hell. And any individual coming in that is circumcised, Abraham grabs them, yanks them out of that line, and puts them in the line going to heaven. Based on all that, to what right does Joseph have in circumcising the Egyptian people? Circumcision's only for Jews, except if it's for conversion. That's healing them, not for wage. And now he is ruining this sign that Abraham has on when people come towards hell. He only pulls out his children who circumcise themselves. But now there's going to be all the Egyptians as well. How did Joseph allow himself to circumcise the Egyptians? So Zera Shimshon tells us his intention was, and it was a good one, in order to help his descendants when they come. The Torah is going to tell us, and the commentaries are going to tell us in the beginning of the book of Shemot, of Exodus, that after Joseph dies is when a new Pharaoh comes. And the Pharaoh does not know Joseph. He makes as if he does not know Joseph. Would it be normal to say that any president, whether you like him or not, does not know who George Washington was? Impossible. Even if he is a businessman and he's not a politician. Everybody knows simple, iconic people. So even Pharaoh, even a new Pharaoh, if you want to go with that opinion, definitely had to know who Joseph was. Joseph was the one who saved that whole world, that civilization. You had to know who he was. But he made as if not. And at that point, after Joseph passed away, and his brothers, and that immediate generation, what set and what allowed the Jewish people to sink into the depth of their exile was the fact that they stopped circumcising their baby boys. Can you imagine? Out of all the commandments that they had, they didn't even have the Torah, the Chumash. They were commanded since Abraham to circumcise their sons, and they stopped. Joseph knew this would be a threat. So look at what he tried doing, the Zera Shimshon says. What he tried doing was making it a standard for the Egyptian civilization to circumcise their boys. when Joseph came and he was circumcised, and then he circumcised his 2 children, they were degraded, disgraced, looked down upon. People were disgusted by the fact that they were circumcised. He didn't want the rest of his family, when they come down, to feel so different, lest they stop circumcising themselves. So he wanted to make it a civilization, a national standard. And so it was. So he didn't have the intention to circumcise them for conversion. He had an intention of making it equal for everybody, so when his family comes down, they'll continue it. Furthermore, Joseph didn't do the second out of the 2 parts of circumcision. There's the cutting and the peeling. He only had them cut and remove the skin, but not peel the leftovers back. If you understand what that means, good. If not, it's another conversation. He only did step 1 of 2 on the Egyptians, and for him and the rest of his family, they did step 1 and 2. So it was evident that there was a difference in that circumcision. But now listen to the greatest part. How do we answer up about Abraham being at the gates of hell, identifying his descendants and not letting them in or not? What did Joseph do? If all of the Egyptians and the Jews were all circumcised, when they pass away, how's Abraham going to recognize who's who? Abraham's not going to rely on who's circumcised or not. Abraham's going to rely on digging deep into their DNA, into their lineage. Is this individual coming that's in line, even though he deserves to be in that line, is that individual my descendant? Yes, it is. Yank him out. What about this one? No, it's Egyptian, but he's circumcised. No, but he's still Egyptian. Let him in. He made Abraham, he did us the greatest gift at that time. He made Abraham be this watch guard at the gates of hell, but not relying on circumcision or not, rather relying on DNA and lineage or not. But what's the point? The point is for the next generation. When the next generation, no one's going to be circumcised, not the Egyptians, and unfortunately not even the Jews. When they get up in line, if Abraham wouldn't have had to train himself to look at the DNA and the lineage, he would have let everybody, even the Jewish individuals, into hell. He would have had to let everybody in. Now, since Joseph made Abraham train himself to look at the DNA, he was able to yank those people out and give them another chance and take them out of that line and put them into the line of heaven. Now, going back to the Zera Shimshon's original question of how was Joseph showing them that he is circumcised? A proof. So he gives 2 answers. That this was a proof that he was Joseph because, number 1, he showed them that he had step 1 and 2 both done. The cutting and the peeling. And this was done years ago. He's 39 years ago. Unlike anyone else, any other Egyptian who only had step 1 and they didn't have step 2 done. But listen to another answer that Zera Shimshon provides. He says, who said Joseph's brothers knew that all of Egypt was circumcised? Maybe they didn't know. So if they didn't know, well, this was a great proof. But if they did know, then how is it that a ruler, a viceroy, was forced to circumcise himself to get food? Let me ask you, do you think Pharaoh circumcised himself to eat? Absolutely not. If this viceroy figure was not Joseph, he would have never had to been forced to circumcise himself. So Joseph comes and says, this is me, I'm circumcised. I was not like the rest of the nation who was forced. On the contrary, I am the one who forced the rest of the nation to circumcise themselves, to give you, my dear brothers, and your families, a soft landing when you come to this crazy land, this land full of physicality and immorality. This was Joseph's message to his brothers. That's how showing them that he was circumcised, a proof. If we think of our Jewish fulfillment and our traditions and our laws and our commitment. Something which we can say the majority, and I think it's one of the only things we can say as a Jewish people that the majority of Jews fulfill, is the commandment of circumcising our baby boys. It's something which Joseph knew was so special. It's something that today, no matter how close or how far, no matter how observant or not observant we are, I can't say 100% because that's definitely not the statistic, but an overwhelming majority of Jews understand that that signature, that seal, that bond which is forged on the 8th day of the baby's life is something which we can never give up. It's something that when the Jewish people gave that up in Egypt, they were saved by God and by Moses on the last strand before they were completely assimilated and done away with. It's something amongst everything else. It doesn't mean that it's more important. It doesn't mean that it is the only important. It is very important, but it should not be that at 8 days old, that is the one and only Jewish experience we give our children for the rest of their lives, continuing them on to bar mitzvah and wedding and having their own Jewish families. But nevertheless, we understand that a staple of our Jewish identity is the fact that we circumcise our boys. May the blessing of the Zera Shimshon always be upon us to make sure to continue that very holy law, commandment, which God set for us to elevate us and to make us greater individuals.